60,000 Filipinos did not fly to Rome for the Colosseum. They came for a 20-year-old girl with a racket, a prayer, and a nation on her back. And Rome had absolutely no idea what was coming. The Foro Italico had staged legends. It had witnessed Federer, Nadal, and Serena Williams hold court beneath the Roman sky. It had survived thunderstorms, political protests, and World Cup celebrations echoing through its ancient streets. But nothing, not one chapter of its storied history, prepared the eternal city for the arrival of Alexandra Eala and her unstoppable army of Filipino faithful. Tournament officials stared at their crowd projections and went pale. Local authorities scrambled. The WTA called emergency meetings behind closed doors. And somewhere in the middle of it all, a teenage girl from Quezon City stood in the warm Italian sun, looked around at the sea of Philippine flags, and whispered, "I didn't expect this." But the world should have seen it coming, because when Alex Eala moves, the Philippines moves with her. And this time, they moved straight to Rome. There is a category of athlete who transcends sport entirely, not just a champion, but a symbol, a vessel for something larger than trophies, larger than rankings, larger than any tournament draw. Manny Pacquiao was that for the Philippines once. When he fought, streets emptied, highways went silent. An entire archipelago of 7,000 islands collectively held its breath, bound together by one man's fists. Then, Pacquiao stepped away from the ring, and a void opened in the Filipino sporting soul. That deep, aching hunger for someone to carry the flag at the absolute summit of global competition. Alex Eala filled that void. Born May 23, 2005, in Quezon City to a business executive father and a former national swimmer mother, Alexandra Maniego Eala was never supposed to be simply good at tennis. She was supposed to be extraordinary. She trained at the Rafael Nadal Academy in Mallorca, Spain, one of the most prestigious proving grounds in the sport. She absorbed Nadal's relentless fight, studied Sharapova's controlled aggression, and built a game that was unmistakably, defiantly her own. She won the U.S. Open Junior Girls title in 2022 at just 17, announcing herself to the world with the quiet authority of someone who had always known this moment would arrive. But the world truly took notice in March 2025, during an otherwise routine WTA 1000 event in Miami. Eala had entered on a wild card. Her ranking sat at number 140. Nobody had circled her name in red ink. Nobody had written long previews about her potential upset runs. She was background noise, a promising junior navigating the brutal transition to professional tennis. Then she beat Yelena Ostapenko, then Madison Keys. Then, in a jaw-dropping straight sets demolition that sent shockwaves through the entire tennis community, she dismantled Iga Swiatek, the reigning world number 2, one of the most dominant players of her generation, as a wild card, without dropping a single set. The tennis world erupted, social media exploded, and in the Philippines, something ancient and powerful stirred. This was not just a win, this was a declaration. A 20-year-old daughter of Quezon City had just announced that Southeast Asia belonged on the grandest stage in women's tennis, and she was not asking permission. By March 31, 2025, Eala broke into the WTA 100, becoming the first Filipino ever to achieve that landmark. Filipino sports journalist Diane Castillo, watching from Manila, put it plainly and perfectly. Eala was already being treated, she said, like a multiple Grand Slam winner. The rankings disagreed. The streets did not. And as Eala's ranking climbed, through 75, through 62, through 50, through the 30s and beyond, the Filipino diaspora mobilized with an intensity that had never been witnessed in women's tennis. Wherever she traveled, they followed. Miami, New York, Dubai, Melbourne. Wherever Alexandra Eala placed her feet on a tennis court, 10,000 flags appeared in the stands. This was the army that had crossed an ocean for her, and now they were coming to Rome. Stop what you're doing for a second, because what happened in Rome in May 2025 was not a fan turnout, it was a migration. The Internazionale BNL d'Italia is one of the premier clay court events on the WTA calendar. Staged annually at the Foro Italico, a breathtaking complex built beneath the shadow of Monte Mario, it draws the best players in the world and the passionate Italian tifosi who worship them. Rome knows tennis. Rome loves tennis. But Rome had never encountered anything remotely resembling what arrived through its gates in early May 2025. Filipinos began arriving days before Eala's first scheduled match. Not dozens, not hundreds, thousands, flying in from every corner of the Filipino diaspora. From London, where over 200,000 Filipinos reside. From the Gulf states, where Filipino workers form the backbone of entire economies. From Germany, Spain, France, and beyond. OFWs, or Overseas Filipino Workers, requested days off, purchased last-minute flights, and descended upon Rome with Philippine flags, handmade banners, and the kind of collective, almost sacred purpose that turns a sporting event into something closer to a pilgrimage. By the morning of Eala's opening round against Marta Kostyuk of Ukraine, the queues outside the Foro Italico stretched back beyond sight. Fans who had arrived at dawn discovered lines that had formed at midnight. The atmosphere inside the complex was transformed. The usual measured Italian applause replaced by the thunderous, rhythmic chanting of tens of thousands of Filipinos who had traveled across multiple time zones to witness this. Eala herself was visibly stunned. Walking through Rome in the days before competition, she encountered compatriots at every turn. I didn't expect such a big Filipino population here in Rome. Even just walking the streets, you know when you're seeing another Filipino. It's such a blessing, of course, to have such a big community. So many places feel like home because of that. For a 20-year-old who trained far from home, in a foreign country, climbing the brutal ladder of professional tennis largely alone, those words carried extraordinary weight. Rome had become the Philippines. The Foro Italico, for one blazing week in May, became barangay grounds, a neighborhood gathering of 2,000 islands compressed into one ancient Roman sports complex. And the city simply had no framework for it. Roman restaurants near the venue reported Filipino customers outnumbering Italian ones. Local vendors scrambled to find Philippine flags to sell and sold out within hours. Tour guides, accustomed to leading groups through the Forum and the Vatican, found their routes blocked by streams of flag-waving Eala supporters moving purposefully toward the tennis courts. The Italian tabloids ran photographs of the crowds under stunned headlines. Social media buzzed with videos of Foro Italico entrances resembling airport arrival halls during peak season, with hundreds of Filipinos embracing strangers who shared their flag, sharing food, sharing prayers. This was not a fan base. This was a force of nature. Here is where the story shifts. Because when 60,000 people show up for one player and the organization responsible for scheduling her matches is not prepared, something has to crack. The Australian Open had already delivered a preview of what was coming. When Eala made her Grand Slam main draw debut in Melbourne in January 2026, tournament organizers assigned her opening round match against Alicia Parks to Court 6. Court 6. A mid-sized, modestly seated venue, the kind of court reserved for matches where organizers expect moderate interest, perhaps a few hundred passionate spectators. What arrived instead was staggering. Queues stretched back toward Rod Laver Arena itself. Fans arrived hours before match time, packing the bleachers beyond safe capacity, filling every viewing corridor, overflowing onto lawns and outdoor screens. Thousands who had traveled specifically to watch Eala play were turned away at the gates, unable to enter a court that simply could not contain them. The umpire spent the match repeatedly appealing for quiet. Security was overwhelmed. After Eala's loss, a heartbreaking 0-6, 6-3, 6-2 defeat to the lower-ranked Parks, she was escorted from the court, surrounded by no fewer than 12 security personnel, just to exit safely. Andy Roddick, watching from the commentary booth, called the scenes crazy. He meant it as a compliment, but for tournament administrators, it was a warning they should have acted on immediately. They did not. So when Rome arrived, with an Eala who had now climbed into the world's top 30, with a fan base that had only grown more organized and more passionate with every tournament, the WTA walked head first into a crisis they had constructed through their own inaction. Scheduling decisions drew immediate fury. Ayala's early rounds were assigned to courts that Filipino hands, armed with weeks of advanced planning and sheer numerical force, packed far beyond the venue's intended parameters. Tournament stewards, accustomed to Italian tennis crowds who appreciate the sport with civilized quiet, suddenly found themselves managing an atmosphere closer to a stadium football match. Chanting, singing, the thunderous percussion of thousands of hands striking together in unified devotion. Beautiful, electric, overwhelming, and completely beyond the operational capacity of an event that had simply not prepared for this magnitude. Behind closed doors, WTA officials convened emergency sessions. How do you manage a phenomenon this unprecedented? How do you honor one player's extraordinary drawing power while maintaining fairness and operational control for an entire tournament? These were not questions anyone had written into the tournament manual. And while administrators scrambled, a separate tension was building, one that threatened to transform celebration into controversy. Every great sporting story needs a villain, or at least a decision so visibly tone-deaf that it creates one. In the week of the Italian Open, as Filipino fans flooded Rome and Ayala's name dominated every tennis conversation on social media, the WTA released its marquee promotional materials for the tournament. Feature interviews, prime court assignments for promotional events, the carefully curated list of players selected for the tournament's official Day in the Life promotional series. The kind of content that reaches millions, signals who the organization considers its faces, its draws, its stars. Eala was not on the initial list. Let that settle for a moment. The player drawing the largest crowd in the building, the player whose fan base had literally altered the demographics of an Italian city for a week, the player whose name was being searched more than any other in the women's draw across the Filipino diaspora, an audience of over 10 million people spread across every continent. And the WTA, in its promotional wisdom, chose not to feature her in the spotlight materials. The reaction was immediate and volcanic. Filipino social media, already primed and energized by the Rome experience, erupted. Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook threads in Tagalog and English lit up simultaneously, thousands of posts carrying the same message. How do you ignore the biggest crowd in your building? Filipino sports journalists, many of whom had traveled to Rome specifically to cover Ayala's matches, broadcast their disbelief to audiences back home. TJ Manatok, one of the most respected voices in Philippine sports media, articulated what millions were feeling. The Philippines had been hungry for a new Manny Pacquiao, he observed, and the WTA appeared determined to look the other way, even as that hunger manifested in sold-out courts and overflowing streets. Filipino fans referenced the Australian Open disaster. They referenced the Dubai Tennis Championships, where Ayala's matches had sold out every session of the quarterfinal run, and tournament executive Philippe Duray openly admitted, "We love every minute of it. We benefit from it. We promote it." They pointed to Indian Wells, where the tournament had voluntarily featured Eala in its Instagram Class of 2026, alongside 7 top 10 players, recognizing star power that transcended pure ranking. And they asked the WTA a pointed, unanswerable question. If every other tournament sees what you're refusing to see, exactly what are you waiting for? The pressure grew intense enough that adjustments were quietly made. A Day in the Life video was produced, court assignments were reviewed, but the damage of the initial exclusion had already seeded a narrative that institutional tennis was perpetually, frustratingly slow to recognize the weight of what Eala and her supporters represented. Peel back the scheduling controversies and the promotional debates, and what Rome actually revealed was something far more significant than any organizational failure. It revealed the geography of global tennis fandom, redrawn. For decades, the sports marketing architecture was built around European audiences, North American commercial partners, and the established star power of the Williams sisters, Federer and Djokovic. The sport assumed a certain demographic, a certain purchasing power, a certain geographic concentration of its most passionate supporters. Alexandra Eala broke every one of those assumptions simultaneously. The Filipino diaspora, over 10 million people scattered across the globe, with particularly dense concentrations in the Gulf states, Western Europe, North America, and Southeast Asia, had found their champion. And crucially, this was an audience that did not wait for tennis to come to them. They traveled. They invested. They bought flights, booked hotels, requested annual leave, and organized group trips to tournaments on 5 continents. They generated viewership numbers that media partners had to keep re-verifying because the spikes were so dramatic they initially looked like data errors. Journalist Andrew Rivera, a Filipino-American fan who drove 2 hours specifically to attend Eala's practice session at Indian Wells, captured the mood perfectly. "I've been coming to this tournament for 10 years, he said. "This is the most Filipinos I've ever seen at this tournament." And Eala herself, with the disarming candor of someone still genuinely processing the scale of what surrounds her, had acknowledged repeatedly that none of this was something she had engineered or expected. "I did not expect this sort of fan base or crowd rallying behind me," she told reporters with wide, earnest eyes. But consider what she had given them in return. Not just victories, though the victories were remarkable. She had given them herself, completely, unguardedly. At the U.S. Open, down 1-5 in a deciding set against Clara Towson, she had turned to the stands and raised her fist, summoning something ancient and mutual between herself and the thousands who had roared her name all afternoon. When she won the point, cameras caught her mouthing a Tagalog expletive, raw, human, entirely unfiltered. Filipino fans did not cringe. They celebrated. "That's ours," they said. "All of it. Every prayer, every curse word, every fist pump. She is ours." That match, finished at 6-3, 2-6, 7-6, 11, made her the first Filipino ever to win a Grand Slam singles match in the Open era. She collapsed onto the court. The crowd went delirious. "I've never seen any other nationality do this," Eala said afterward, voice trembling, eyes scanning the stands. "To be Filipino is something I take so much pride in. I don't have a home tournament, so to be able to have this community here at the U.S. Open, I'm so grateful they made me feel like I'm home." Rome was the same truth, written on a larger canvas. 60,000 people had not descended on Italy to watch tennis. They had descended to witness a young woman carry their identity, their diaspora, their sacrifice, their longing for visibility on the world stage into a stadium ringed with European grandeur and ancient stone. Every point she played was a point for every Filipino nurse working a night shift in London. Every shot she struck resonated for every OFW sending money home from the Gulf. Every match she won was a win for a nation that had exported its people across the planet and was now, finally, watching one of those people stand at the absolute summit of global sport and refuse to be small. The WTA's scheduling challenges were real. The promotional oversights were real. But against this backdrop, they were also profoundly beside the point. By the close of the Italian Open, Alex Eala's ranking had pushed deeper into the world's top 30. Her clay court game, her own admission, was still developing, still finding its maturity on the red dirt that demanded a different kind of patience than the hard courts she preferred. She had come to Rome knowing that. She had come knowing the French Open loomed weeks ahead, knowing Roland Garros would present its own enormous challenges. But she had also come knowing something far more important, that she was no longer carrying the Philippines alone in her heart. The Philippines had physically arrived, 60,000 of them, packed into Roman streets and stadium corridors, pressed against barriers, chanting her name in a language the Eternal City had never heard echoing off its marble colonnades. What does that do to a 20-year-old? Eala herself had been asked over and over throughout the year whether the weight of it all, the national expectation, the crowd pressure, the sense of 100 million people watching through her eyes, ever became too heavy. Her answer was always the same, delivered with the quiet certainty of someone who had thought deeply about exactly this question. "Pressure is part of my job," she said during the Philippine Women's Open in Manila. "A lot of people ask me how I handle it, and of course there's added pressure playing at home, but it's nothing compared to the pressures that regular, everyday Filipinos have to face, providing for their families. It's nothing compared to what my parents sacrificed to bring me here." That answer silenced rooms every time she gave it, because it revealed the steel beneath the youth, the philosophy beneath the talent. Eala was not burdened by the expectation of a nation. She was powered by it. Every cheer was fuel. Every flag was armor. Every Filipino who had traveled to Rome and Melbourne and Dubai and New York to watch her play had not added weight to her shoulders. They had lifted her. And in doing so, they had collectively built something that transcended any single tournament result. The Italian Open had been forced, through the sheer force of 60,000 people, to reckon with the new geography of tennis passion. The WTA had been forced, however reluctantly, however belatedly, to confront the reality that its most powerful crowd story was not in Paris or London or New York. It was wherever Alexandra Eala traveled with her Philippine flag stitched to her soul. The Foro Italico had never seen anything like this. Neither had Melbourne, neither had the US Open, neither had Indian Wells or anywhere else on the WTA tour map. And as Eala's ranking continued ascending, as she pushed towards the top 20, then the top 10, then the heights where Grand Slam titles are contested and won, the question hanging over women's tennis became impossible to ignore. What happens when the girl who carries 60,000 fans to Rome becomes the best player in the world? That question does not have an answer yet, but somewhere in Mallorca at the Rafael Nadal Academy, where a girl from Quezon City practices her backhand until the sun disappears behind the Spanish hills, the answer is being written. One match, one prayer, one raised fist at a time. And when that answer finally arrives, rest assured, 60,000 Filipinos will be there to witness it. Was Rome the beginning of the most extraordinary fan phenomenon in the history of women's tennis, or just the opening chapter? Drop your answer in the comments. And if this story moved you even slightly, hit subscribe, because as long as Alex Eala keeps climbing, this channel will be right there with her for every triumph, every controversy, and every city that thought it was ready.